Let's get going, AP Psychology. We are going to continue talking about developmental psychology, and today specifically we are going to look at the physical development and the stages and what happens from the moment of conception or fertilization through those later years. And the reason the physical development is so important is because what's happening to us physically has a direct impact on what can happen to us cognitively, emotionally, our moral reasoning, all of these things. So when we talk about development, all aspects are equally as important. So we're going to start from the very, very beginning, and we're going to start with what we call the zygote. And we're not going to get too specific here. This isn't a biology class, but we do need to understand the phases. And the zygote is really when the male and female reproductive cells join together. And some people might call that the moment of conception. Biologists like to call this fertilization, but that is the very beginning. And I think a good way to remember that the zygote is first is because the letter Z is the very last letter in the alphabet. So the zygote is first. And then once the zygote has these genetic instructions and what's going to happen, and it magically becomes an embryo and attaches itself to the placenta. And the placenta is really what connects the mother's bloodstream to the baby and helps sustain that life through the 9 months of pregnancy. And then once the embryo has reached the age of approximately 8 weeks after fertilization, it then becomes a fetus. And from that stage on, that's kind of when the finishing touches are put on this individual, this baby. And then in the 9th month, here they come. And get ready to go, because it's a crazy ride once you enter the real world. So as we talk about birth, there's a term, a phrase, it's called the critical periods. And as we talk about development, it's important to understand that the critical periods are times during which specific stimuli have a major effect on development. And if these critical periods are missed or the opportunity has passed by, it can very often impact development. And this is true for both physical development as well as cognitive development and emotional development. But we're going to focus right here on the physical development in these critical periods. We need to address the fact of birth defects, and about 2 to 3% of newborns actually are born with some type of identified birth defect. And these can result from a malfunctioning gene or an environmental stimulus. And so when we think about the idea of nature versus nurture, birth defects can sometimes be an act of nurture, because it is something that the mother actually has control over and that she places on that newborn or that baby. So there's a term that we need to understand, and it's called a teratogen. And these are agents, these are chemicals, these can be viruses, these can be illness. These are agents that can reach the embryo or fetus during prenatal development and actually cause harm. And I think most people are aware that the common teratogens of drug and alcohol, that they can actually harm the fetus. But let's look at some of these a little more specifically now. Stress can be a teratogen, and it's so important during the pregnancy, that the mother's health and the mother's well-being and her mental health are looked after, because stress impacts your heart health. And we know that the mother's bloodstream is directly tied to that infant. And so stress can have a negative impact on the development of the child, of the baby. And the other thing to consider too is that a stressed mother could be more likely to engage in behaviors that could affect the fetus in a negative way, that the mother could turn to other agents that could harm the child. So alcohol is absolutely a teratogen, and it is not safe to drink in any amount during pregnancy. And you might hear people come back with the argument that, oh, one glass of wine or, one drink. The bottom line is we know that alcohol during pregnancy is the most preventable leading cause of mental disabilities in children in the United States. We know this to be true. The outcome of a mother drinking alcohol during a pregnancy, the outcome can be what we call the fetal alcohol syndrome. And the result can be physical abnormalities, cognitive abnormalities. Children born with fetal alcohol syndrome physically look different. And you can see in this image here the changes and the differences in a child born to a mother who used alcohol during her pregnancy. And these intellectual impairments can range from very minor disabilities to very severe intellectual disabilities. And the thing that we don't know and we can't pinpoint is that there has absolutely been a rise in the number of students in the educational system with identified learning disabilities. There are many reasons that could be happening, and it could be because of better identifying measures, and it could absolutely be because of higher awareness. But as a teacher talking about development, you have to keep in the back of your mind that question, could it have been one of these teratogens? And that's where the adherence to that no alcohol rule could make the difference in the development of a newborn. You can see here the differences of a baby's brain that was not exposed to alcohol during pregnancy. And the one on the right is a child who was born with fetal alcohol syndrome. So there's no denying that it can have a negative impact on the child. Another teratogen would be smoking. And we have come into an age where we are absolutely aware that smoking is bad for everyone's health. But when the mother smokes, the baby is given a very reduced amount of oxygen. And if a baby does not have oxygen, the blood cannot flow, and that reduced blood flow will ultimately reduce in low birth weight, premature births, sometimes stillbirth, and then there's a phenomenon, it's called sudden infant death syndrome, or SIDS. And this happens when the baby has come home from the hospital and they've been staying with the family in the home. And very often SIDS happens at night, and what happens is the lungs stop working and the child stops breathing. And these are outcomes of smoking during pregnancy. And they can be outcomes of being exposed to smoke during pregnancy. So you don't just have to be the smoker for the teratogen to have an impact on an unborn child. You can be living in a house with a smoker or be exposed to smoke on a regular basis. The research hasn't quite come in on the effects of marijuana. However, you have to think smart and understand that smoking, and if you smoke marijuana, that it's likely that the impact could be the same. Again, we don't have the research. We don't know about so many of the new products on the market, edibles, those sorts of things. But I would say that we know what alcohol can do to a child. We know what smoking can do with a child. I think we have to assume when looking out for the health of a newborn child that marijuana would fall into that same category. Prescription drugs, illegal drugs, the use of any type of drugs. If a mother gets sick during pregnancy, doctors have to be very careful about the types of prescriptions that they give her, because anything that the mother takes, the child also takes. And illegal drugs are incredibly dangerous because babies can be born addicted. They can have a low birth weight. They result in premature births. And it's very common for these children to grow up with attention and behavioral issues as well. So here's the thing. We've talked about teratogens, we've talked about the stages, the zygote to the fetus, but now you're here. And after you're born, the greatest impact on the brain that you are going to have are those experiences that come in the first years of life. Being a baby is magical. So let's find out what happens. So as we talk about development and newborn babies, the first thing we want to look at is what we call baby reflexes. And these reflexes are just sets of innate, meaning we are born with them. They're unlearned. Nobody has shown the little infant what they have to do to survive. They come out with these reflexes, these just natural set of behaviors. And one of the first ones is what we call grasping. And if you give a baby, if you put a finger in the hand of a baby, they instantly close in on that and they cling to that. And it's a sense of survival and wanting to be connected to the mother. That reflex goes away pretty quickly by about age 3 months, but initially, it's a reflex for the child. The next reflex is what we call rooting. And rooting is a response the child has to really find the source of food. If you rub a newborn baby's cheek, they will reflexively turn to the side that they felt that touch around their mouth. And again, this is a feeding instinct. And very often if you take a bottle, or if the mother is breastfeeding, if you use the nipple on the bottle, or with the mother as a rooting reflex, then the baby is able to find the source of food. If you put a finger in the mouth of a newborn, they will naturally suck on it. That's why pacifiers are such a key part of newborn development, because sucking provides a sense of comfort for the baby. The last two reflexes, the next one is called the Moro reflex. And it's this idea that if a baby senses that they're falling and just out of nowhere, they have these almost like tremors and they shake. And it's sort of a protective, hey, wake up, something bad might be about to happen. It's called the Moro reflex. And then the last reflex we're going to mention is the Babinski reflex. And if you've ever been around a baby and their feet are so tiny and cute, but if you stroke the bottom of a baby's foot, it might be in a relaxed state, and then you touch it and then you touch it, and it kind of fans out. And that's the Babinski reflex. And the way I remember the Babinski, if the last three letters are a ski, where do you put a ski? You put a ski on your foot. So the Babinski reflex is the foot fanning. When a child is born, before they leave the hospital, actually before the mother even gets to hold the baby, in the hospital they're given what's called the APGAR test. And the APGAR test goes through these series of reflexes, or at least most of them, and they are given a score of how well they perform these reflexes. And that helps to them in the hospital to determine the baby's physical health. So here you can kind of see the evolution of a baby, and this is one of my good friend's little guys, and we put together this little montage of his life. This little Cody, you can see him at 1 month and passing all the way up to a year, and it's pretty incredible, all those changes that happen from birth up to about 1 year. Right. So continuing to talk about development, we need to understand the term developmental norm. And a norm is the thing that typically happens at a certain time. This is the standard for development. Now here's the thing with babies. Every parent wants to think that their child is exceptional, and they want them to perform these milestones earlier than all the other babies. But babies just aren't wired that way. They don't have the muscular strength. They don't have the cognitive ability to put some tasks together. And that's why this timeline here in terms of when things happen for babies, it's pretty true to form. You might have a child that might perform a certain task a wee bit earlier than another, but in general, these are the dates and times that certain things are going to happen for babies. And these norms are important, and pediatricians use these norms to determine if a child is developing normally. And if they don't hit some of these milestones, these developmental milestones at the times that are typical, then it could raise a red flag, and there might be reason to maybe look into it a little bit more to make sure there is nothing wrong. So with an infant, look at these pictures. This is what babies see. Sight is actually one of the senses that is least functional in those early months. Touch is the most well-developed sense. And think about those reflexes. How many of them had to do with touch? The rooting reflex, the Babinski reflex, the Moro reflex, if they're startled, okay? Those are the sense of touch, highly developed. Vision, on the other hand, is a little slower to happen, okay? They are all about feed me, feed me, feed me in the beginning. They can't see, but they can hear, and they're very much tuned into a mother's voice because they are typically the main source of food. But a funny thing to consider is all the work that goes into very often in creating the perfect nursery for a child, and all of these great beautiful walls and decorations. And guys, take a look. The baby is never going to see that. They're going to be aware of what's happening in their room until about 6 months. What we do know is that the color red, the color black and white, big, bold patterns can be highly attractive to newborn babies. But I doubt that very many parents are going to be interested in painting a checkerboard wall for their newborn. Probably wouldn't appeal to the mother's sense of decor. So we're moving on to ages 7 to 11. And this is kind of the school age years. And the neural networks, the brain is continuing to develop, and things kind of slow down for a bit. Okay, when you're an infant from 0 to 5, man, things are happening fast, fast, fast. And then they start to slow down a bit. From the ages of 11 to 18, you begin to see some more distinct changes during adolescence. Physically, guys and girls tend to begin to change. You start to see the growth of facial hair. I'm stuttering here for this awkward moment and trying to figure out how to talk about this. But you know what I mean, because most of you are in the midst of this. So we have some physical and sexual development, and this is when puberty happens. There is a shift in hormones, and for females, this is the beginning of menstruation, and the term is menarche, and girls will have their first period. It's happening earlier and earlier. This stage of development is beginning to shift. Decades ago, this stage would begin at about age 13, but because of better nutrition and because these genes are being passed on to other generations, the age for this stage is progressively getting younger. And then finally, ages 18 to 50. That's a big span of life, and not a whole lot is happening. But I think the one scary thing that begins to happen is that when you hit about age 30, guys, that's it. You can expect to see a 1% decline a year in all of your sensory capabilities. You are really as strong as you're ever going to be. And if you are thinking, well, I could go to the gym, well, you're going to have to work harder at the gym. Your vision is going to decline. I didn't always wear glasses, folks. There's a magic year. It's age 40. Many of you need to ask your parents about it, or you've probably witnessed it already. It's called the elbow bend. And the elbow bend has to do with their ability to see things close up. And usually, typically, normally, you can read things like this. But about age 40, you start to see that reach. You go to a restaurant, they can't read a menu. It's that 1% decline. Huh? You say? What'd you say? We're losing our hearing too. And then you throw in for women, menopause, and that just mixes everything up. And then that last stage, your later years, if you're mid-50s and beyond, you begin to see a decline in muscle tone. That's what wrinkles are, guys. And women tend to show age quicker and more harshly than men, and that has to do with a hormonal loss and the loss of collagen. And that's why there's so many fancy creams on the market for women, because they are losing their muscle tone. So we have covered physical development. We've all gone through it. You are watching your parents and your grandparents go through all of this. So this is an interesting basis to set the stage for our further study of development in future lectures. So good job. Way to go, AP Psychology.